Welcome to an all-new episode of the McFuture podcast. I'm Steve Faktor, and today we're going to talk about a company that is in the process of self-destruction. And it is an amazing case study of everything I've been talking about in terms of politics, in terms of culture, in terms of well-intentioned people destroying a nation, things like that, little small things. Now, in case you haven't heard of Basecamp, it's a company that makes corporate communication and collaboration software. Ironically, it is also a company that is being destroyed by a failure of internal communication and collaboration. The founder, or one of the co-founders of the company, is actually a pretty prominent guy. He had created a kind of a coding language called Ruby on Rails that's used by Uber, Airbnb, and a whole bunch of other tech companies. And both of them have co-written a best-selling book about remote work, and they're very avid bloggers. They're also very political online, so they support a lot of causes. They've also been very aggressive going against Apple and the App Store and some of the policies they think are unfair, because they developed this email app, and Apple first banned the app, and then they wanted to charge it 30%. They didn't want to pay the 30%. They didn't think it was fair. Anyway, these guys are very vocal and very hyperactive on Twitter. So it's not surprising that when all of this stuff went down with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and the protests, that these guys spoke out. They started recommending all of these books about the Black experience, and they essentially invited a level of politics into their business that hadn't previously been there. So employees were empowered and encouraged even to discuss all of these political issues that we face. And also, as a tech company, it's very likely that a lot of their workers are in this sort of millennial category that are very activated, especially, in the Trump era. Everyone just, politics became part of their identity or took over their identity in a lot of cases. As the protests waned and the politics stayed, their message boards and their internal communications started to become toxic. So they had all this talk of, white supremacy and all this, sort of upheaval that's happening internally, and accusations and struggle sessions. So, and this is happening in a lot of different companies. So suddenly every one of your employees is turned into Bernie Sanders or AOC, and they're just constantly protesting. We've got developers in cages. And AOC has her white smock on and she's rattling the fence, and you're like, we never had a fence in the office. Where did she get a fence? She brought her own fence and she brought her own photographers, and now she's got problems because she's oppressed. The same person you just hired like 6 months ago, and she's been developing some features for the software, and today she is just activated and she's mad and she's got a piece of fence. A piece of fence. That's right. Not literally, but you know what I mean. And none of this is happening in a vacuum. In, I think it was 2019, all of these CEOs signed a letter saying how they need to look out not just for shareholders, but for stakeholders. Of course, they didn't put anything substantive on the table to say exactly how they're going to do it, because all their incentives are still for shareholders. The other thing is they've been putting in these ESG metrics, which is environmental, social, and governance. And I'm going to do a whole separate episode on that. And of course, when the protests broke out, a lot of companies promised to hire more minorities and look at their own hiring practices and build, equality and equity. In some cases, those were very genuine efforts. In other cases, they were diversions, saying the right things in order to get the permission to continue doing the wrong things that they were doing. And so a lot of opportunists came in with these corporate training programs based on something that is at best unproven, at worst completely divisive and destructive. And companies have allowed this inside, sometimes with very good intentions, but often with very contentious results. I remember there's this one guy, he was a teacher. He wrote about his experience. He said that they actually created for these training sessions separate rooms for employees of color and white employees. And at some point, he's like, oh, wait a minute, this looks a little bit like apartheid. I don't think that was his word, that's my word. But at some point, when you find yourself segregating people by race, you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe we're doing something a little crazy right now. It's good that we're having these conversations. Unfortunately, it's going to take a lot of storming before we get to a norming and a stabilization, because I think tempers are high, and I think a lot of people are also high because pot is now legal. No, actually, they are feeling this, political moment, and it's activated them. So, but when you turn into an activist, you also are not a critical thinker. And when that happens, you're not dealing with rationality. And I think, or I hope at some point, more rational ways of dealing with some, serious issues come to light. And of course, tech executives, and all executives really, but especially tech, they all jumped into the fray. There's a company called McFuture, and their CEO essentially wrote a letter saying, and I'll just read a couple of sentences, "We are facing an unprecedented attack on the foundations of democracy itself. If you are a US citizen, anything less than a vote for Biden is a vote against democracy." Now, whether you believe that or not, companies are now extremely politicized, and they always stealthily have been, because they've been donating so much money to different political campaigns to gain favor. Typically, those things have been related to things that they wanted to do, like pollute in a river, or like destroy the environment or something like that. That's practical. They now are entering more of a fuzzy phase where they can advocate for or against candidates or broader political issues. And of course, that draws the ire of people like Ted Cruz. What Ted Cruz said was, when the time comes that you need help with a tax break or regulatory change, I hope the Democrats take your calls, because we may not. He's probably going to take the call. But he might not. He might be busy, he might be in the bathroom, he might be, at a charity event for the Ted Cruz Foundation. There's all kinds of places Ted could be where he's not available to take or call corporations. But if you send him enough money, I suspect he might. We kind of know that politicians are on the take, but he basically said, he's like, hey, I'm not going to take your money and do your bidding anymore if you're going to go woke. And then there have been other CEOs, like the CEO of Coinbase, who drew a ton of heat because he tried to make his company apolitical. And this was sometime last year. So he put out a memo saying, hey, listen, we are going to depoliticize our company unless it's an issue that directly affects the company. And in the process, what he did was he offered up a pretty attractive severance package. 60 employees quit, which was about 5% of the company. He weathered the storm because the people who didn't want to do that got a chance to leave. So what's happening at Basecamp is happening in this broader context of politicization. That's a very complicated word. I do not recommend it. Everyone's becoming more political. What the two founders did is they put out a memo saying, hey, we want to take it down a few notches and focus specifically on our business. They wanted to shut down these chats that were hyper political and divisive. And they're like, look, we're not going to be punitive about it. And you're more than welcome to discuss politics outside of work and be an activist or do whatever you want. But at work, we want you to focus on the job. One of the founders, David, he tweeted, quote, "We also like to tell ourselves that having these discussions with the whole company is healthy. I used to think that too, but I no longer do. I think it's become ever more stressful, unnerving, and counterproductive." And I think a lot of people that I talk to in these situations are feeling that. And even the people that this is supposedly helping are feeling uncomfortable because now all these white people are going, hey, I'm sorry. And they're like, what did you do? I don't know, but whatever it is that I did it and I'm sorry. And it puts everyone in this weird, uncomfortable position. I think there is room for us to come to grips with the things we've done and sins of the past. But if you specifically do not have any sins and you're apologizing, it's going to be weird. It's going to be super awkward between you and a lot of people. Anyway, so what happened afterwards was an obligatory media takedown because media they love the juiciness of this kind of story. I mean, this is what these bloggers dream about. This guy, Casey Newton, he put out a post saying, quote, "The move was received more as a shift to willful ignorance about the world around them and about the lived experiences of the employees who occupied it." Anyway, there's a lot of sort of like fuzzy innuendo type of things. So the three specific things that they mention in this takedown. One is they had at the company this 10-year-old list of funny customer names. It is the most juvenile, Simpsons-like, stupid thing that they could have done. Now, these founders were probably in their late 20s at the time, and so were the people who were perpetuating this. It was a stupid thing. I don't think they should have done it. I think the person who created it had left the company a while back. I think it's legitimate to criticize a company over something like that, but I think they probably wouldn't do that now. So I don't know that it was so unforgivable. The other thing that was really dark about this article is they linked that, and I don't remember what jiu-jitsu was used to do it. They linked it to the shootings of the Asian massage parlor workers that happened. And I'm like, funny customer names 10 years ago in a company managed by 20-somethings may not be exactly related to shootings. The other thing is they had these sort of disgruntled young wokester quotes. So one of the employees said, "The profit sharing plan gave more profits to people who have longer tenure, a group that is a majority white and male." Okay, the two founders are white and male. So yes, they probably have preference. And yes, tech in general has a big diversity disparity. No one really talks about it honestly because I think a lot has to do with the talent pool. So the problem, or if it is a problem, happened upstream, where people coming out of schools with those degrees are not necessarily representative of the population. Nor do I think it makes sense for every population to be totally representative, because if it were, I would like to be playing point guard for the New Jersey Nets. Or they're not the New Jersey Nets anymore. I am changing this to the Brooklyn Nets. I would like to play point guard, but not every population is going to look like everything else. So any disparity needs to be looked at in light of the incoming applicant pool. Now, if in the applicant pool you find that there's discrimination, someone's not choosing more qualified minority candidates, that's a problem, and that should be litigated. But just looking at a snapshot of a population and projecting racism onto it is not correct either. But I don't think we're having those honest conversations, and I think we also need to talk about what challenges happened upstream, or maybe decisions that are happening upstream where people aren't choosing those professions who are coming from different demographic groups. And in general, this concept of guilt by association has become so pervasive and so insane that if you were to replace the word white with the word black or any other minority group, everyone would be in prison who is saying the things that they're able to say. So I don't think the answer is reversing discrimination. The answer is equality. And sometimes equality of opportunity will produce unequal results. So what's been the aftermath so far? They've lost about a third of their workforce. I think they had 60 employees and over 20 have left. Some people said that the number's as high as 33. I don't know what the final number is, but it's a pretty substantial number. So let's be clear about what's happening. People are leaving six-figure jobs just because they want to discuss politics at work. Everyone in Guatemala just jumped out of a factory window. Of course, they have nets, so they bounce right back in, and now they're back to making our clothing. So can you imagine telling this to anybody and not feeling deep shame? I would love for you to go to a factory in China or in Guatemala and explain to the workers why you quit your job. They would never stop pummeling you. they would beat you like they dragged who was the guy Gaddafi that they dragged through the streets. I mean, this is insanity. The lack of perspective here is, and the level of privilege is so off the charts. I don't even know. Like, I came from a third world country. I came from the Ukraine. It is a dump. Anyone there would trade places with any of these people in a second. And the fact that this is like a huge hill that they're willing to die on, or at least quit their jobs over, it is so crazy and insane. So the other thing that happened is after the article, they had an all hands meeting and the head of strategy said something crazy like, hey, we're not white supremacists at this company. And he got suspended 30 minutes after that meeting and then was fired. Although he said he, stepped down or whatever, but we know what that means. That's the environment we're dealing with. It's really Orwellian is what it is. And he kind of fell into the Kafka Trap. So the Kafka Trap is if someone accuses you of something, you're that thing. But if you defend yourself, your defense is taken as proof of your guilt. So it's this circular reference. There's no way to not be guilty. Kafka, can you hear me? Da-na-na-na-na-na. Kafka. This kind of reminds me of the witch trials in Salem. Their test for whether you were a witch was if they tied rocks to your feet and they threw you in the river or into the lake or something. And if you sank, you were not a witch. And if you floated to the top, you were a witch. And guess what happened? Not a lot of floaters. So whichever way this comes out, you kind of lose. You might as well have been a witch. You might as well have been on Bewitched. The other thing that's happening is Ruby on Rails, which is the platform that one of the founders developed that other companies use. It's losing maintainers because there are people who are politically siding with the workers, and maybe even some of the workers worked on it, and they're dropping off. So maybe that whole platform or that programming language is going to suffer because of this. I've seen a couple of people who are customers posting and they're worried. Other customers are saying, yeah, we're going to switch software. We're going to switch to Slack or some other software. So this thing might take the entire company down because they've lost tons of key workers and now they're losing potentially customers and maintainers of their platform. So what are the lessons here? Well, first, we're dealing with an entirely new kind of worker, especially the affluent classes. They didn't grow up with a lot of minorities. They didn't grow up poor. But now, because of what's happening in our culture, they have guilt and the desire to throw some water on that burning flame of guilt. But a lot of the things they do are not good ideas. But regardless, people have become politicized. That has become their identity. And guess what happens when you try to take political discussion off the table? People see that as an affront to their identity, to who they are. That's like a personal attack. You're robbing them of, bringing their whole self to work. I did a whole segment on that in some other episode. There's this mantra that, hey, I need to be me at work. And I think it was Disney that recently announced that you could have tattoos and have all kinds of personal flair. So now like Mickey Mouse is going to have like a Mike Tyson facial tattoo. I don't know if Minnie Mouse with extra piercings is a worse Mickey Mouse, but that's kind of where we're heading. And large institutions are going to have a lot of trouble handling this if they fully submit themselves to this reality. And there is a cult-like quality here because when people become activists, facts are not your thing, or you will selectively use facts to weave a narrative to be a better activist. And that's certainly what a lot of media is doing. For the founders of the company, there are some realities for them too. They don't provide equity for their employees. And companies that are VC funded are selling that dream where you can have that crazy upside and be like 100 millionaire or something. A lot of this was avoidable. Most of it comes down to culture and the clarity that you set in your mission and what you are and what you're not. I don't think corporations are great vessels for morality because they're fundamentally amoral. Their interests take on a momentum of their own. And it's very hard, maybe easier at smaller companies like Basecamp, but much harder as you grow to be moral and be corporate. I don't think anyone is prepared to confront the ugliness that's necessary to create their comfort. Oh, that's pretty good. Leaders need to set the tone early of what they are and what they're not. It's very easy to drift towards insanity once you let any kind of activism loose inside of an organization. More than even culture, it's the idea of change. People don't react very well to it. Now, if you create a change that a person wants or thinks they want, and then you try to take that away from them, that is going to be way worse than them not ever having it at all. When I worked at MasterCard, they had a great cafeteria. They even put little raisins and nuts into the tuna and chicken salad. That's the most heartwarming thing. That's almost like something, a great mom would do. About 2 years in, they must have dropped down a level. Maybe it got too expensive. You definitely noticed a change in quality. And so I would go out to lunch with people and I was complaining. I'm like, ugh, the sandwich is terrible. It's like, and I would be talking about the good old days of the great cafeteria. But all the new workers who had joined after the cafeteria had already been downgraded, they were like, what is this complainer talking about? What is this guy, like how annoying that this guy would complain about the cafeteria. And luckily I had the self-awareness to go, okay, maybe I should shut up about this, because that change screwed me up because now I'm always comparing the new thing to the old thing that was better. And I think that happens to all of us. And it certainly happens in corporations. So careful what you give, because you may not be able to take it back and not without significant cost. The other question is, this is something I don't know for sure, but there's a couple of possibilities here. There may have been a conversation between these two founders where they're like, look, we're going to put this exit package on the table and we're okay making this package attractive enough where all of the troublemakers leave and we start anew. Maybe they knew that and maybe they priced that package accordingly. The other possibility is they underestimated how many people would get up and leave. And also people who are most marketable might be likeliest to take it. It's kind of creating a risk-free environment for these departing employees because first of all, they're in a high demand field. If you're in tech, you're going to find another job. That's not a problem. Plus on top of it, you get some money to enjoy and go, hang out for a few months. And you get woke points for announcing and proclaiming that you left for these noble reasons, even though you might have just taken the package. And then you could almost imagine them at their next job interview and the employer's thinking, hey, am I taking on a lot of trouble here? Because this person, is super political. And they're like, well, why did you leave your former employer? And they'll be like, oh, I totally did it for the package. So you left because of the package? Was it a big package? Oh yeah, it was a huge package. Oh, I took this big, huge package. So you love big packages? I love big packages. Okay. Anyway, they're going to have a lot of convincing of others to do to say that they did it for the big package and not for, political reasons that might scare off future employers. And yeah, it is kind of scary because you're dealing with someone that may not be containable within the corporate environment. And that's scary to an employer. And I've been in large corporations, very conservative corporations, and there are just things you don't do and things you don't say. And the people who move up in those organizations kind of figure out what those things are. And maybe if everyone becomes super political, it won't matter. But I have this sneaking suspicion that that's going to take down a lot of companies from within. So depending on what their goal was, you price the package accordingly, or you kind of have to take the temperature of the room. Have one last struggle session, a little, a microaggression, nanoaggression or something, whatever, however it's perceived, but get those employees in a room and say, look, this is what we're planning to do. This is why we're doing it, and maybe communicated rather than through a memo, through a conversation. And that way you get a read on it. Or maybe they already had a read on it and said, listen, we're going to have to pull this off sort of like a bandage, because otherwise you're going to rip out a lot of hairs individually and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot. So maybe they chose the path of least resistance and they were willing to deal with whatever repercussions in the marketplace or customers or public scrutiny was going to come with it. I think there are best practices here. And they're different for different types of companies. So let's say in journalism. In journalism, there's a Washington Post memo that just got released. And essentially they told their employees that, look, you can go to apolitical celebrations like Juneteenth and, parades and things like that, but we don't want you to undertake public activism and go to protests and do things like that, because we need to at least preserve, I don't think this is exactly the wording, but it's the reality. We at least have to preserve the look of impartiality, even if you're not totally impartial and you have your opinions. And you can't have your reporters seen at rallies. They shouldn't be activists outside of work, but inside of work, in terms of being activists for truth or discussing politics or writing about politics and religion and all these controversial things, that's okay, because that's part of their job. That's something that they might cover or have to put into an opinion or a news column. So they're kind of the inverse of what most other companies should be. Most other companies should say, look, we're fine with you doing whatever it is that you do outside of work. And I think they should be much more forgiving in general about what people want to undertake in terms of activism, in terms of their personal ideas and opinions. But inside of work, I think what's happening is we're just relearning what prior generations already knew. There was already a thing where it's like, hey, don't discuss religion or politics in public or with strangers or in polite society. That was always the thing. Like, I grew up with that. That does make sense. And especially in corporate environments, unless there's something that specifically affects the business. And there might be things that are judgment calls. And in those cases, look, you got to be forgiving to employees and you say, hey, listen, we're not going to punish you or anything, but this isn't appropriate for work. Take it offline. Go have that conversation or meeting, even if it's with coworkers, but do it outside of work. I think that's the right thing for most companies, as long as you have a strong mission, as long as your employees feel valued, as long as you're not discriminatory, as long as you don't have stupid lists of funny names of customers, just don't do stupid things. And I think you can build goodwill even with woke workers. The smarter or better thing is to do that upfront rather than wait until it explodes, or worse, implodes and creates a cancer inside the organization. Generally, my advice to companies is to cut the bullshit. For every person bought off by a cheap woke slogan, there's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 people who see right through it. You're actually going to damage your brand by trying to put on these airs. People are waking up, not just wokesters, because literally the word wake is in their job description or in their activism description. We are starting to see some of the cynicism and opportunism in this movement, and some of the bad logic, some of the bad narratives, some of the guilt-driven, misguided activity. The intentions are good. we can build on those good intentions with substance rather than cosmetics. If you're just looking at a population and you're ready to point a racism finger or a white supremacy finger at an entire organization, that's a problem, just as much of a problem as when you would point at another race back in a different era and say all people of this race are like that because one person did something, or because that's just your bigoted opinion because you lack the exposure. It's no more right today than it was before. And what we're seeing also is companies embracing the cynicism of this moment, because they think that if you can say all the right words, toss in all the right buzzwords, that all will be forgiven and you can continue doing what you were doing before because you checked a few boxes. And there has been no better example of this than this CIA commercial. That's right. The CIA has gone woke. I'm going to show you this ad. It is mind-blowing to me.
When I was 17, I quoted Zora Neale Hurston's How It Feels to Be Colored Me in my college application essay. Zora's sentiment articulated so beautifully how I felt as a daughter of immigrants then and now. I can wax eloquent on complex legal issues in English while also belting Guayaquil de mis amores in Spanish. I can change a diaper with one hand and console a crying toddler with the other. I am a woman of color. I am a mom. I am a cisgender millennial who's been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. I am intersectional, but my existence is not a box-checking exercise. I am educated, qualified, and competent. I used to struggle with imposter syndrome, but at 36, I refuse to internalize misguided patriarchal ideas of what a woman can or should be.
Now, let's be clear. There is no such thing as diversity at the CIA. There will never be, because the mission remains the same. So you could have all kinds of rainbows of colors and genders and things like that, but at the end of the day, you might have to murder a foreign general. You might have to supply arms to a militia. You might have to do a drone strike on a Afghan, village, and hopefully get the bad guys, if whatever the bad guy definition is, and try not to kill too much of their family. That's the mission statement. That's the reality. So you can give us all the great commercials in the world. In fact, I almost picture like a Russian general sitting in some smoky room watching this going, why are more people not honored to be killed by such diverse and inclusive administration? It seemed like the best way to die. Why not thank Premier Biden and Diversity Harris? They're very good people. And if I had to die, that is how I would choose to die. Now, of course, I will probably be killed on accusations by Putin for talking to media, but that is okay. Look, we all die in different ways. I prefer to die, at the hands of diversity. So please, CIA, I will send you coordinates. If they come for me, hopefully you get to me first, okay? Thank you. This is the McFuture. See you later. Thanks for joining. Don't forget, share it with others, and review the show on iTunes and all the other platforms if you can. And please join the Patreon. So much amazing stuff coming up, and support the show. You'll get tons of exclusives. You'll get more of me. I've got a surplus and I am ready to share. Patreon.com/McFuture. That's it. See you next time on the McFuture. Can you imagine working at a company where your employees think you're a white supremacist? Hey, that's Bob over there. Yeah, ignore it. Yeah, I know he usually comes in the hood and he tries to oppress Janice over there. But, today he's in a good mood, and so he doesn't have his pitchfork and his torch. I mean, can you imagine how crazy things have gotten that people just casually throw around these really insane accusations? Like, it's not okay. It is just not okay. But it's almost like we've reached a level of comedy that is so, perverse and dark that you almost wonder, like, maybe I am a white supremacist. I've never chased anyone down or not hired someone but I don't know, it says it in this book, and we did an exercise where I sat with all the other white people in a little punishment room without the heat on because, we're guilty of something. It's crazy. It's really crazy. And, I love all people, but I don't love crazy people. And there's a lot of crazy people throwing around a lot of crazy terms. And it's just funny, and Bob does not appreciate it because his hood is in the laundry. We've gotten so crazy and comical now that all of a sudden, using these terms and calling someone a Nazi or a white supremacist, that just rolls off the tongue a little too easily. So why not embrace the terminology altogether? Why don't we all just run with it? Seems perfectly normal, doesn't it? Does it? Are we all cool with that? We've gone nuts. If you're saying the words white supremacy with any regularity at the office, you are insane. You've gone nuts in a way that I'm not sure. Certainly not this video is not going to help you. I don't know if a team of therapists or, or maybe, what would help? A trip around the world to see how everyone else is. You go to Europe and they're literally throwing bananas at black soccer players. That's how insane it gets at some of these places. So to think that America is the problem relative to the world, yeah, I think we all have an image of perfection of what we'd like the world to be. But to compare ourselves constantly to some utopia is not only unrealistic, it's childish, and it really doesn't go a long way towards helping people for real in the situations they're in. Well outside of the struggle sessions where a bunch of six-figure people are struggling with their personal guilt and issues. I don't know that we could afford to become therapists. I don't think we can. I've noticed that almost every single article in Harvard Business Review and all of these HR things, they are not only scratching at the surface of psychotherapy. I would argue that most companies are now clinics. They are now psychiatric wards where you are now catering to the sensitivities of workers who are easily triggered, easily upset, maybe fresh out of college where they were able to express this sort of rage and activism, but now has to be contained in a much smaller box. And, and now you've got the older workers that have to deal with it too, because they're kind of on pins and needles trying to not get fired or accused of anything. We've created a very crazy environment, and not a lot of work is getting done, because once you back out all of the message boards about all the activism and all of the other peripheral HR activities, you've created a lot of overhead that is likely taking away from your business. So the more the business can be clear on objectives and expectations, you can avoid not all of it, but a good chunk of it, and still encourage and not punish people for the things they do outside of work, unless it's criminal activity of some kind. Now, these guys are also very big into quality of life. And one of the things that they've preached in the past is entrepreneurs, especially tech entrepreneurs, not taking venture capital money and giving up all that control and power to outsiders. They're saying, oh, you can have a perfectly successful tech company without having to give all that up. Other tech companies have been eaten alive by this philosophy. So imagine you decide, hey, we're going to bootstrap our company and we're going to just fund it with our income and profits, and then someone else gets hundreds of millions of dollars from a venture capitalist. Who do you think has a better chance? Even if you have a better product, a better vision, those guys are going to learn, they're going to copy, and they have the resources to make mistakes and then trample over you and eventually get to a better product and have enough money left over to throw a big party, probably your funeral. It's sort of like being a pacifist while someone's punching you in the face. So they've drawn controversy based on this and created quite a few enemies, I'd say. It seems like they're on the ropes, but in software, you can never count a company out because a lot of things are self-service. They might be just fine and maybe wanted to clear the decks and clear a lot of budget room. It could have been a very good strategic move if they can weather the bad PR.